Naughty Dog, a game developer that has been synonymous with my gaming career since it started. One of the first games I ever played on PlayStation was Crash Bandicoot, particularly the third game, Crash Bandicoot Warped. Sorry about that, but it's the law, you must read the title that way. At the time, the visuals, music, and characters made a lasting impact on me, making me not only a fan of platformers, but a fan of PlayStation, the developer, and the franchise. I was so engrossed in the game that it influenced me to play the previous Crash games, and the games that came after it like CTR, which is without a doubt one of, if not my favorite kart racing game ever made. Sorry, but Mario Kart just never hit like CTR. It's still fun, but nonetheless. After CTR though, they moved on to newer projects and gave full creative direction to Universal Studios Interactive, who then proceeded to not know what the fuck to do with him for the foreseeable future. It was rough, but it's okay. We got Insane Trilogy in 4 now, so all is well. And then this happened. Anyways, that newer project that Naughty Dog moved on to after Crash was Jak and Daxter, starting with Jak and Daxter, the precursor legacy on the PlayStation 2. A spiritual successor to the formula of the Crash games, it was a solid, fun, fully 3D platformer with great visuals, characters, and an open world design that at the time was fresh, innovative, and ahead of the curve amongst its competitors. After the success of the first game though, the game's sequels made drastic changes, becoming darker and edgier, not only now just titled Jak, but becoming these child-friendly pseudo GTA clones essentially. I enjoyed them as an edgy child, but now outside of the visuals, I feel the games themselves have aged poorly, especially when compared to rivals like Ratchet and Sly Cooper. There was also Jak X. Yeah, honestly not much to say here. I'm sorry, but this game is rough, and it's really fucking rough. And then came Uncharted. My bad. And this is when Naughty Dog went from a PlayStation developer to the PlayStation developer. The level of quality in not only its gameplay and design, but also its presentation was unmatched at the time of release, as the storytelling and cinematic flair of the game served to make Nathan Drake a mainstay on not only the PlayStation platform, but the gaming industry as a whole. The trilogy of Drake's adventures would go on to be a massive system seller on PlayStation 3, with each subsequent game raising the bar and further showing Naughty Dog's prowess and understanding of how to balance an engaging game with a compelling cinematic narrative. At this point, it was made clear that Naughty Dog is a company that strives to impact, elevate, and set the bar with each new product they set out to produce in each new generation. But nothing could have prepared us for what they'd make next. Of course, I'm talking about The Last of Us. The Last of Us is not only the most significant game from Naughty Dog's library, but one of the most important and influential games made in the 7th generation. A game that went beyond the bounds of just being a video game, with a grounded, gritty, and real narrative on the level of some of Hollywood's most ambitious and impactful films, and graphics that at the time we thought would never be superseded. I'm not an absolute fan of the game itself, but nonetheless, I cannot deny that the game impacted me as both a gaming enthusiast and an aspiring writer when I first played it and experienced the tale of Joel and Ellie, and I understand its impact and widespread acclaim within the gaming community and industry as a whole. With it, Naughty Dog would further become the face of the PlayStation brand, with other developers chasing the success they garnered producing games that erred on the same presentation and quality they'd made the new standard. Yet even the dog cannot be stopped. Outside of a remaster of The Last of Us for the 8th generation, their next project would be Uncharted 4: A Thief's End, the last hurrah to the character of Nathan Drake, and boy what a send-off it was, setting the bar higher once again in presentation and scope for not only what PlayStation could deliver, but also what video games as an art form could accomplish. A masterful ending to a series beloved by fans. Many wondered what was next for Naughty Dog following its Chloe-focused DLC The Lost Legacy, which, I can't lie, it was just okay. I do love me some Chloe though. And what was next was a surprise. The Last of Us Part 2. At first, when it was revealed, I did scratch my head, as I personally thought, It did not really need a sequel, but nonetheless, I was excited and eager to see what Naughty Dog was looking to make, as their track record was only ever rising for me at the time. Amidst many controversies and leaks regarding the story and creative decisions, I decided to avoid any discussions surrounding the game and stay optimistic for Naughty Dog's biggest title to date. June 19th, 2020 came, I picked it up, played it all the way through, and I hated it.
I'm gonna find, and I'm gonna kill every last one of them.
I felt so empty and confused. So many questions raced through my mind both throughout and after beating it, but they all fell under one universal word. Why? Why this story? Why this focus? Why these choices? Why? At the time, I thought it was one of the worst games I'd played in a long time, and it had been rife with confusion surrounding its general reception within the industry, with people claiming it was a masterpiece and giving it high scores. Did I miss something? Were we playing the same game? It was a lot. Regardless, time would pass and I would come to forget about the game and my feelings about it altogether. Until now. Because after the recent release of the second season of The Last of Us HBO series, I was compelled to revisit the second game, and I was shocked to find that my opinion has not changed in the slightest, which brings us to why you're even here right now. Well, you're here because I want to tell you why I believe this game is one of the worst sequels I've ever experienced, an unfortunate fall from grace for Naughty Dog as a developer, and undeserving of the critical acclaim it has garnered. As a disclaimer, I would like to say before we get into things deep that this is strictly my opinion about the game and should in no way, shape, or form impact your view or enjoyment of the game. You like it, I love it. You're allowed to be wrong. I'm not gonna stop you. Also, I will be covering and showing things within this video that will be considered spoilers, so for all of you who haven't played the game yet, good job! But I also suggest you go experience it for yourself and then come back to this video after. Also, I won't be talking about controversies like false promotional material and other things, as I am not here to deep dive into this game's entire existence. That's a whole bag of dirt in and of itself, and I am simply here to talk about what we got, not what we thought we were getting. Sure, there are many other videos that will talk about them better than I ever could. With that being said, let's begin talking about the masterpiece that is The Last of Us Part 2. Before we get into the core of what makes this game the antithesis of its reception, I did want to shed light on the one thing I found impressive and agreeable regarding this game's acclaim, and that is its presentation. The Last of Us Part 2 is without a doubt one of the most gorgeous and technically impressive productions I've seen, not only from Naughty Dog, but within the game industry from the point of its release all the way up to today. Many other titles have certainly rivaled it in terms of pure graphical fidelity and technical performance by now, some even superseding it. But Part 2 certainly set a new industry standard for how cinematic games should be presented going forward. The world they constructed feels real and lived in, with the amount of color, detail, depth, and scope they managed to put into the game without it falling apart or slowing down. It's honestly mind-blowing and conveys the level of effort and prowess Naughty Dog carries in their understanding of game development, ideation, and the architecture of PlayStation hardware, pushing it beyond its limits. Characters look amazing as well, and the performance of the actors and the quality of their motion capture is superb, conveying true emotion and presence of the characters through detailed expressions and body language across the entire game. I still remember seeing the cutscene with Dina helping Ellie out of her clothes and watching how seamless and real the cloth moved off her body, and realizing that was in-engine blew my goddamn mind. And rope being like real rope had me roped up. Goddamn, say that 3 times in a row. I dare you. You won't. It continues to support and propel the fact of Naughty Dog's lead in pushing the bar for visual and cinematic presentation within the industry, and I could never fault it for that, no matter my opinion of the other parts of the game. With that being said though, graphics aren't everything. Graphics are very important and integral to a game's pull and appeal, but are not the utmost priority for what makes a game necessarily great or terrible, especially for someone like me. I can get the same level of enjoyment out of a game that's pixelated than a game that's pushing the industry standard. So yeah, it's gorgeous and truly a marvel to behold even nearly half a decade after its release, regardless of if you bought that useless remaster or not. But at the end of the day, if you spray paint a turd gold, it doesn't change the fact that it's still a turd. With that out of the way, let's get into the actual case. Now, I'm not personally sure if this is a major or minor point of defense, but I've certainly heard this mentioned by several people I've had discussions with about this game, so hear me out. For some odd reason, people seem to defend this game not only from a narrative perspective, which we'll get into later, that's the big meat and potatoes of this case, but also from a gameplay perspective as well, and frankly, I cannot fathom how they believe this is valid in a discussion regarding the game's total quality. Now, am I going to say that the gameplay in this game is necessarily worse than the first? No, because there are some aspects of the gameplay that have been refined in comparison to the original game, as well as thanks to Uncharted 4, which was released not too long before it. It's better, but it's ultimately just serviceable and does not make the game any more fun nor less problematic than the first game was. Let's face it, a lot of this game on the design level is quite literally just the first game's approach to third-person action game design being retreaded with a new set of paint. Everything from the way you progress throughout the levels to the way you handle combat, exploration, and puzzles is nearly identical to the first game. There isn't really any attempted innovations to the core gameplay loop outside of some smaller things like slightly faster crafting, having the ability to go prone, and that beautiful rope I mentioned earlier. Otherwise, it's the same experience as the first. Combat, no matter if you're shooting or throwing hands with enemies, still feels heavy and inconsistent at times because of the mechanics not really changing much from the original. Throwing hands does not make your game good if it doesn't feel satisfying, by the way. Uncharted 4 did it better, and that's saying something because it is technically more bare bones. Exploration is also the same, searching every nook and cranny for crafting items and ammo that you need, which while useful and thematically resonant with the game, ultimately kills the pacing in conjunction with the narrative. I get it, it's an apocalypse setting. It is an essential aspect to include since scavenging is a necessity for survival. But when it feels like the game's experience is 75% story and 25% actual game, and 15% of that 25% is looking through drawers and upgrading your weapons to make them feel good, even though they just should in general, it's not fun, just a chore. But Adamant, they added linear open world sections that allow you to tackle objectives at your own leisure. Okay, they're barely memorable and very few times within the game, not to mention they're not really all that rewarding in the sense of enhancing your gameplay. It's the same gameplay repetition, but now you just gave me a larger area to begrudgingly navigate. Game sequels are supposed to take the experience of the first title and enhance, polish, or add new mechanics and elements to make the game feel fresh, if not a complete improvement from the previous game. It should stand beside the first title as another solid experience, or supersede it to be the definitive version of that gameplay design and style. Part 2 doesn't do that. It serves you the same design and experience that you'd not only get from the first game, but also from other third-person action games that have come before it and after it. Hell, other third-person games are more polished and refined because they've taken the base formula that this game employs and have polished and enhanced it since then. I'd rather play Gears of War than play this game because it's more fun. I'd rather play Max Payne 3 than play this game because it's better controlling. I'd rather play Resident Evil 4, the game that laid the groundwork for how these games should play and feel, than play The Last of Us Part 2, because they just feel and play better and are more refined compared to it. And that's not even to say I'd play the first one over this game or even over those other games, because in all honesty, the first game by proxy isn't really a fun game to play either. The only difference is the story kept me invested and tolerant of the gameplay. Speaking of which, I think it's time we get to the big meat and potatoes that I mentioned earlier. Working up an appetite. Nah, like seriously, I'm actually hungry now. God damn it. The Last of Us Part 1 is not by any means a masterpiece of game design, but there is no denying that the first game has a phenomenal story. Memorable characters, great pacing, an incredible sense of immersion, and a fantastic message that leaves itself impressionable, thought-provoking, and impactful. I don't need to explain to you the success and lasting impact of this game on the gaming industry, it's common knowledge. As I said before, I was excited to experience the next game because I was ready to experience more of the intriguing world of The Last of Us through the lens of Joel, Ellie, and their connection to each other. Little did I know that the story was going, to put it kindly, in a different direction.
Please stop! Please don't shoot! Joel, please get up! No!
This game's story is 80% of the reason why I do not recommend the game, and the reason why I am skeptical in regard to Naughty Dog's next project, which is also looking like a grab bag. What, you're not hyped for ad placement the game with Porsche spaceship? Come on. God damn it, why can't I be excited or hyped for a game anymore, man? I do not understand how Druckmann and his writing team completely misunderstood not only the process of producing a sequel, but also managed to create a narrative that completely besmirches nearly all that the previous game established in favor of a message that is conveyed in the most asinine way imaginable. So let's start with the overall message and driving force of this narrative: revenge and the cycle of violence. The story of Part 2 from beginning to end carries this message of the influence of rage in conjunction with desire for vengeance and the coming reality that it is meaningless and only leads to great loss. Now on paper, that is not a bad thematic choice for a video game. It's actually quite brilliant and could have been very effective. However, The Last of Us Part 2 unfortunately forgot that it was a video game, and that ultimately is what does the most damage to it. The message certainly tries to be present and make the player consider their actions as you progress through the game from the perspective of both Ellie and Abby. But there's a problem, and that is that no matter how you feel about the actions of these characters and what transpires throughout the game because of them, it never matters. The game seeks to teach you the ills of rage and revenge by having you engage in senseless and often pointless amounts of violence throughout, which in my opinion contradicts the overall goal of the narrative being conveyed. How do I learn from your message of the cycle of violence if you constantly have me engaging within it? Without a choice. And even then, the game plays like you can avoid conflict, but then still plays out narratively as if you still did engage in it irregardless. To progress the story, I must kill. You make me murder countless amounts of people on both ends for the purpose of exacting revenge, for the sake of your message that in the end is ultimately sent, but not in a satisfying or correct way. More so in a way that contradicts the experience the game puts you through. Hell, it doesn't even help the structure when you consider the characters present within the story outside of our main focal characters. In fact, let's talk about our supporting cast, shall we? Every support character within this game is nowhere near as memorable, impressionable, or integral to the progression of the story or the support of the message as the first game. I don't care about any of them, and even if I could, there's no chance to. Every character involved within this game of cat and mouse is there to serve the plot in either two ways: be the moral voice that the two main characters continue to ignore in pursuit of their goals, or they're just bodies to be collected in order to drive the plot forward and keep tensions high between Ellie and Abby. More often than not, both. What I'm asking in response to that is this: why present the presence of moral ambiguity if it ultimately won't serve a purpose for our main characters or in the narrative moving forward? It shouldn't be there just for the sake of being there. It has to carry meaning and affect something, and it ultimately never does. It seems like Neil Druckmann and his team clearly wanted to pull a Hideo Kojima, but didn't understand that Kojima, no matter how heavy he goes on his narrative depth, conveyance, and message, still remembers that he's making a video game and implements the interactivity of the game with his stories effectively enough to convey his message to the player in a meaningful way. This game, sadly, does not. Now let's talk about the main trio that ties our narrative together: Abby, Joel, and Ellie. Let's start with Abby.
Joel Miller.
Who are you?
Guess.
Abby as a concept is brilliant. To have a character that connects the threads to the end of the first game in the way she does is understandable. There's a clear motive to her personality and her actions within the game, and she, alongside her group, interject an interesting new lens to see not only the world of our story through, but also our main characters from the first game through. She's a very well thought out character on paper. In execution, however, she is terribly flawed and ill-managed in the ways of serving the narrative and the goals the game seeks to reach. The game wants you to empathize with her, but never allows you enough time to really know her. It just presents you with scenarios in history that is supposed to elicit some form of sympathy from the player, but ultimately goes nowhere because I've only just met her. The game wants you to weigh morality on both sides and see that there is no right or wrong, but very blatantly and clearly tries to make Abby have more moments of care and consideration for others around her than Ellie does. Abby cares about her people. Ellie is bloodthirsty. Abby likes dogs. Ellie kills dogs. Abby saves people. Ellie spares no one. Ellie kills a pregnant woman. Abby almost kills a pregnant woman. You see what I'm getting at here? It just all feels so arbitrary and forced for the sake of making her impressionable or likable, which even then she is not a likable character because of her selfishness and impulsiveness throughout the entire narrative towards others over... what's the dude's name? I don't fucking care. All in all, Abby as a character fails as both an antagonist and secondary protagonist because she feels too forced. It did not feel like we got enough time with her to understand or connect with her after she kills a character that we were connected to, and I feel that needed to happen for this message and plot to truly hold water. Speaking of the dead...
Jesus Christ, Joe. What do you do?
I saved her.
Joel is the best character in this franchise. He is the driving force of the first game that, at least for me, kept me playing and wanting to progress the story. Because what's captivating about Joel is that he's not a good man. He is a violent and emotionally void man whose experiences have made him desensitized to his humanity and prioritization of survival. He is a man traumatized and fearful of allowing himself to feel and hope for a tomorrow because of his tragic past and the horrific experiences he's endured up to this point. He has so many layers and complexities that make him such an easy person to empathize with and want to support, not because he's a good person, but because he's a bad person whom we know has been forced to do bad things because of the nature of the world and his past. His selfish decision to save Ellie from being vivisected for the cure to save the world is horrible, but because we connect with him and his connection to Ellie, we understood why he did it despite knowing it was probably wrong. Because he's human. We're human. And humans understand when others make tough decisions that they would also make. Anyways, what does that have to do with Joel's presence in part 2 as a whole? I mean, Joel's only present in the game through the beginning of the game and flashbacks with Ellie thereafter, so how does he fit into the case of this game's lacking quality? That's simple, because his death means nothing. But adamant, his death is literally the catalyst that drives the entire plot through. And you're right, it is, but here's the thing about that. The reason why Joel's death is meaningless is because his death is only carried out for the sake of creating a darker, pivotal event to drive their plot into action for the sake of their sacred message. Outside of being the catalyst for this revenge plot to unfold, he holds no significance within the narrative outside of his interactions with Ellie in retrospect, which feels so arbitrary and unbelievable, as the fraying of Joel and Ellie's connection feels forced for the sake of setting up the narrative of the game and is in the grand scheme insignificant when you put it into view of the presence of his death as a motive for Ellie. Not because it is not justified, but because it feels like the events that led to their broken bond don't make her desire for revenge any more or less strengthened. This game eliminates one of the most compelling characters and the sole connection that built the franchise for the sake of carrying out a narrative that not only is in disservice to its characters, but is also wasted by the end of the game and resolution never being fulfilled. A loss that should and could have held so much more weight and purpose behind it ended up being an empty choice that ultimately does not enhance or contribute to any part of the narrative in any form like the losses we endured in the first game. Joel died for nothing, but at least he's not alone. Last but certainly not least in any facet, we have our central protagonist, Ellie. From the moment we meet Ellie in the first game, we knew that Ellie is special. Even before we find out about her immunity, her personality, attitude, and demeanor all elicit this energy of innocence and wonderment. She is quite literally, for all intents and purposes, the antithesis to Joel's character. And that's why she works so perfectly. They have both faced traumatic events prior to their meeting, and Ellie throughout the first game's progression experiences the darker nature of the world she'd been so desperate to venture into, but unlike Joel, Ellie does not let the ill nature of the world get the better of her. She remains strong in and of herself and moves forward with hope, which leads to Joel opening his cold heart to the cruel world they're in through their connection. In that way, she embodies exactly that and instills it in all of those around her. Hope. She is a living embodiment of hope in and for this world. As such, having her take on the central protagonist role over Joel was the natural and clear choice for a sequel. It would allow the audience to connect with her on an even deeper level than before, and allowing us to fully experience an older Ellie from her own perspective with Joel where she was previously as a supporting character. A sequel following Ellie's growth into adulthood and experiencing more of her connection with Joel and the world's challenges could have made for a great follow-up. But that's not what we got. What we got was far more tragic than we could foresee. Ellie is by far the biggest and most offensive blunder of this sequel. While Joel died in the sense of literal removal from the plot, Ellie's death came in the form of the assassination of her character. This Ellie is a shadow of her former self. She no longer embodies the hope we established within part 1. No, now she is a violent, emotionally void, selfish character with none of the endearing charm and personality outside of some few scenes within the game. Most of those being the flashback scenes to the Ellie we knew and loved. This new Ellie is weak to me. Unlikable and unbelievable when trying to understand her character's progression from the first title to now when reflecting on her actions, priorities, and attitude throughout this story. Funnily enough, when you think about it, Ellie's character died because she became just another survivor in this world. And I know some people will say, well, yeah, that's the point. She lost herself in her lust for vengeance. Okay, sure, cool, but is that representative of what you really believe Ellie would have become? Someone who is willing to sacrifice all she's built and everyone she's cared about for the sake of revenge that was self-propagated? Someone who was cold and inconsiderate of her actions and the repercussions of said actions simply to avenge someone who no doubt was significant to her, but certainly would not have sat right with her actions reflecting his past mistakes? I don't think so. Ellie, by the end of this game, is unrecognizable, an amalgamation of self-grown hatred and bloodlust that ultimately in the end, after all the senseless, malevolent acts and choices she's making, fails and is left where Joel was and would have never wished her to be, alone, void, and lost with nothing left. Ellie, our hope, is left hopeless. And in a way, she embodies the experience of The Last of Us Part 2 in its totality. Hopeless. A long, tedious, repetitive journey that lacks substance, meaning, or real impact because it feels like no parts of this game were truly thought out in a ways of creating a deeply rooted narrative with a message interwoven into every key part of the game to make it a complete and substantial experience. A game that attempts to be an innovative touchstone for gaming and cinematic entertainment as a whole and ironically fails in the end to embody either very well. Now I know some will ask, well then Adamant, what would you have done or would do to fix The Last of Us 2? The answer? Not a damn thing. I mean, we got what we got. There's no fixing this at all. However, I will say this. I think part 2 would have fit better as a sequel within this franchise if it was not part 2. Now stick with me here. If this were the third and final game of the series and the second game was made with an emphasis on establishing more of the growth of Ellie and Joel, both together and individual, I think it could have worked. You could have even established Abby within the second game as a character and had her form a connection with Joel and Ellie as allies or something of acquaintances with her. In that, you could have then revealed her connection to the events of the end of the first game, established a conflict between characters in a meaningful and tragic way leading into the events of part 2, which is now part 3, giving the setup of the journey substance, weight, and impact. But I'm just rambling. In the end, we got what we got. And what we got is a convoluted, forced, confusing, tasteless, and ungraceful mess of a sequel that after playing through fully in the pursuit of something meaningful ultimately leaves you with disappointment. The disappointment of going through what felt like everything for it to turn out to be nothing. Absolutely nothing.